Hey, what's going on, everyone? Welcome to episode 8 of the Alec Walt Show. I'm your host, Alec Walt, alongside another very special guest, and today we're talking about the NHL. Today at around 3 p.m. Eastern was the NHL Trade Deadline. There were a ton of moves, including the Boston Bruins adding a very solid winger. We're going to talk about all of those moves right now on the Alec Walt Show. Joining me to break down the NHL Trade Deadline is DJ Mitchell, the fantasy hockey and betting analyst for the Mayo Media Network and the host of the Morning Skate Pod. DJ, welcome, man. Welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, well, long time no see. We were just together for the first time in a while over the weekend. Extremely exciting day for a lot of hockey fans, never Sabres fans, as I happen to be a very, very depressed Buffalo Sabres fan, and even the bigger Taylor Hall fan. So really disappointing to hold on, let me show it off. Finally.
I cannot believe you bought that.
Yeah, I am an idiot. But we finally get a big free agent signing in Taylor Hall. It's been a while since the Sabres have pulled off a move like that. It never works. I don't know why I expected anything different from the Buffalo Sabres, who swing and miss every single time. It's amazing, but I'm happy to be here. Happy to finally get on the show. We got to get started with Taylor Hall, right? Is that where you want to go first?
Yeah, I mean, this is the thing. Like, when you look at the return for the Bruins, it obviously doesn't blow anyone away. We don't need to talk about the return just yet, but Taylor Hall, you look at the, NHL 21, you see the high rating, you look at his numbers right now, you're like, what the heck am I looking at? What version of Taylor Hall are the Bruins? What have you seen? What version of Taylor Hall have you seen this year on the Sabres?
Probably the saddest version of him. It's very strange because, I just want to start by saying a lot of people that are really analytically minded love what Taylor Hall's done this year. The metrics and everything he does when he's on the ice, they look good. I like analytics. I love hockey analytics, but when it's not producing goals or wins, it doesn't really matter to me. And at the end of the day, I'm here more for guys that are producing at, fantasy output. And he just hasn't done that at all this year. Not even, at the beginning of the year, just for betting people out there like myself, his shot prop lines were at like 3.5, 4. And he was hitting that occasionally when he played with Jack Eichel. His shot prop lines went down to 2.5 and stayed there. He just wasn't shooting. And the more gifted players like Taylor Hall, especially when you lose in Jack Eichel, they need to be the primary shot drivers on each line that they play for. It wasn't doing what he does best. And at that point, the Sabres got to get rid of him. Now, when you get to this deal, the way I see it going down, and obviously I'm not in the room, Taylor Hall had some say in where he went with his no trade clause. He wanted to go to Boston. The Boston Bruins knew that. It sounded like Boston kind of settled in on a third-round pick for Taylor Hall. They got blown out by the Capitals and decided they needed to make a move. There were other teams trying to get the services of Taylor Hall. I think a couple that he would have considered in Carolina and maybe Vegas. At the end of the day, the Bruins gave an offer that I think was probably the best. There's rumors out there. You're going to hear a million different people saying, well, look what Sam Bennett got from Florida. It doesn't matter because the trade clause is the trade clause. The Bruins win the trade, I think, without a doubt. But the Sabres got back at least something. More than I think that was originally on the table for a guy that has an $8 million contract hit in a year where the cap didn't go up. He has not produced, and there's definitely no guarantee he's staying anywhere he's going. So you're getting a rental on a reduced season. If the Bruins go out in the first round, that's going to really hurt, but it's only a second-round pick and not even a prospect anymore in Bjork, just a middling third, fourth liner. So I think the Bruins at the end of the day, it's a big win for them in a year that they're going for the cup. How many years they got left? So the right move for the Bruins to do, in my opinion, and then we'll kind of get to where he's going to fit in the lines because I have some thoughts.
So let's okay. Bruce Cassidy, what are you doing?
I'm probably putting him with the Krejci-Ritchie line, at least to start, because I think you want to keep that perfection line intact, especially when we get to the playoffs. The playoffs are where everything changes. I think having a guy like Nick Ritchie, who's a big body, really, really great shot. And I think that's what, if anything, Taylor Hall hasn't been able to do is get some freedom out there to produce his shot that he can take. But what he's always done before this year is he's been a top 5 player in taking the puck from his zone and moving it into the offensive zone and starting the play. It was him and Jack Eichel. That's why everyone on the Sabres were like, we finally have play drivers. Like, these are the guys that can maneuver the puck into the zone. If he can do that with Ritchie, I think that could be special. It kind of works out well for him on the left side. They've been bouncing guys in and out. Even Pasternak's been moved down there a number of different times just to try to kind of keep multiple lines going. That's where the Bruins have always been successful, is having third, fourth, and definitely second lines that produce goals. And this year just really has dried up a bit, and that's why they're not winning as much. So I think that that's where you want to put him, at least for now. The perfection line can roll, and that second line can start finding some goals, which I think Richie could do that with Taylor Hall services, it's really going to take off.
So one thing that's been weird about Taylor Hall's career, it seems like every team he's on has been bad. Like Edmonton, when it started off, wasn't great. Devils, not very good. It looked like Arizona was going to be solid. They ended up not turning out to be much. Then your Sabres, you look at your top two pairing, and now they're the worst team in hockey. Now he comes to Boston. He's not the best left winger. He's not the top skill guy. Obviously now with David Pastrnak, this is probably the first time in his career that he's not, has the pressure to be the top line guy, the number one scorer, the number one power play guy. How much do you think that's going to help him? Because that'll be something new for
him. Yeah, I think just a change in general is what he needed, and getting into a winning environment. And anything you want to say about the Bruins, and as a Sabres fan, it's been a just incredibly frustrating time to watch a team just continuously win and always come back the next year and still be good again, even though everyone says, well, the Bruins are finally going to start the decline. They're getting older. They're losing this defenseman. They lose that defenseman. Doesn't seem to matter that much. So I just think that culture shift, he's going to get into a room with maybe arguably the best leader in hockey outside of what many assume Crosby being maybe the best, with Bergeron in that locker room at the helm. It's just a totally different identity and culture that I think he's going to thrive under. Because you're right, he's always been looked at. When he was on the Devils, I mean, he was the guy, and he got the MVP season, and then he wasn't the next year, and the Devils just were a terrible team. So I think it's going to be a huge change in the right direction for him. I mean, when he was in Edmonton, it was an absolute circus. I think that has really been one of the biggest issues. Is he comes from arguably, I would say, the most frustrating hockey market. That and Vancouver are probably the two most frustrating. I think, obviously Toronto is Toronto. But just the amount of anger that exists in Oilers fans, because they were so good for so long that once they fell off the map and just completely bottomed out, it was just very, very hectic in the media. And I don't think Hall thrived in those conditions. And it's really hurt him ever since. And he's just never been in a locker room like he's going to be in now. So I hope the best for him. I love Taylor Hall. I mean, I have the Devils jersey too. I'm a huge fan of his game. I'm a huge fan of what he can do. So I really hope it works out. I'll be rooting for him regardless of the jersey he wears. So it's going to be interesting. But yeah, definitely, if you take a guy out of the most toxic situation in hockey and move him into at least a very good situation in Boston, even though it's been a bit rocky this season, they're still a playoff team. They're 2 games in hand, 4 point up on the Rangers. The Flyers sold off a bunch of pieces. They should be fine to make the playoffs. And if they get hot and Tuukka Rask can get back to form, they should be fine.
It's good to hear, because they got some tough teams in their division, DJ. It seems like everyone there made a move. Let's start in our nation's capital, because Washington made a huge move just before we started recording. Now, it was funny because just before this move happened, I said to you, did Washington do anything? And you just said, they made a minor move here. And then you went, we have a trade. They picked up a power forward from the Detroit Red Wings, and it's about time, because I've been saying for a while this guy's got to move. Anthony Mantha's now going to a contending team. How do you see him fitting with the Washington Capitals?
It is. The Anthony Mantha story has been interesting from the get-go. He's kind of one of those guys that when he was a elite prospect, if you will, a lot of people thought, like, will Detroit hang on to him? They've made the playoffs X amount of years in a row. Are they going to move off the prospects that they got and try to stay alive? And obviously wasn't the right move, and they didn't do it. He has a couple amazing years where he was just a force on a terrible team. And then this year, not very good. He's been benched multiple times, just seemingly out of nowhere. He'll get benched for a game, and then the coach will say, he's just not there right now. So I think that situation reached its boiling point to where they had to move him. He still has 4 years left on his contract at about 5.7 AVV. Most of that's backloaded, though, so the Washington Capitals will be paying more than the amount of money that the cap is going to be. So that's kind of why they had to move out a couple of pieces. Defenseman went to the Devils beforehand. Everyone was kind of like, they're going to move off this guy, seemingly a piece here and then all of a sudden Mantha comes in. I love Jacob Vrana, though, going back the other way. He only has 1 year left on his deal before he's an RFA again, but I think that could be a piece that Yzerman was really needed to get Mantha out. They're not a team that I think is going to stay down for long, the Red Wings. I think they'll get back to, being a contender sooner or later. But, man, is Mantha, if he could catch what he had again and get back to that form he had. I mean, we're talking about a guy that had, I believe, 25 and 24 goals in 17, 18, and 18, 19. And we're talking about a team that was so incredibly bad that, just the worst team in hockey almost ever in 18, 19. To still have 48 points in 67 games is really a feat when you're playing with guys that are AHL or below quality. So I'm a big fan of what he can do. Is best Anthony Mantha is going to, take the Capitals to the next level for sure. If Anthony Mantha continues the way he's playing now and can't quite catch lightning in a bottle, they gave up a lot. And Vrana is a good player, and it could be for a long time. So it'll be interesting to see.
Yeah, where would you, knowing that he hasn't been playing well, would you put him on that top line? Like, where do you think he fits right now in Washington?
Man, Washington's lines have moved around so much. They change their lines almost every game. Where's he going to? Right now, if we look at the current lines, I'm just going to pull them up. They're not going to change them after their last game, as they absolutely handled the Bruins 8-1.
Yeah,
so we have Ovechkin, Kuznetsov, and Wilson. I think that stays regardless. That line just really has been clicking. Vrana comes out, Ehlers and Oshie. You might just put him right there. I'm surprised Backstrom isn't with Oshie right now, but Ehlers has been really, really hot for them and has been for a while. So, yeah, I think he probably fits in right there right now with Eller, and then Backstrom, if he can get back to form, can move back into that second-line center role. I don't really see any reason. Mantha is a true right winger. I can't imagine that you put him with Ovechkin on the left side. That just wouldn't make a lot of sense to me. So probably put him right where Vrana was and just roll the lines as is. I think he's an upgrade, but not a huge upgrade. The bigger question for at least me and other daily fantasy players is he going to be on the top power play? I like to think he would be over Kuznetsov, but it's going to be tough to see. I wonder how they're actually going to reform that power play up, because Ovechkin obviously has the OV spot and plays both of the two units. So I don't really know where he's going to fit in there, but either way, they needed to add another scorer to that team and get some more depth. And hopefully, like I said, if they get the Anthony Mantha of a couple of years ago, they got a guy that is a 30-goal scorer in the making.
Yeah, well, you talk about teams that needed scoring depth. Let's go to Long Island, because it seemed like if Matt Barzal wasn't scoring or passing the puck, they weren't doing much offensively. Now, they went to a division rival, not too much far, into New Jersey, and picked up Kyle Palmieri and Travis Zajac. Palmieri, it seems like he's been on the Devils forever. It seems like every year he's on the trade block. He finally finds his way to a new team. The Islanders are good. They're deep. They now got additional scoring depth, guys who can hit, a coach who's been there and won before. What do you think of this move for the Islanders?
First off, we've already got a little taste of what these guys can do. In their first game out, I believe it was against the Rangers, they won 3-2 in overtime. Maybe that was the second, but it was kind of one of those things where like the trade happened and people were like, are they going to play the next day? And everyone was like, it's a 45-minute bus ride. They're going to go play the next day. What are you talking about? So it was kind of nice for them to go right down the road. But when you lose a guy like Anders Lee, and you're already the Islanders, who don't win games by winning 8-1, they win games by winning 2-1. It's a huge hit, because the way Barzal and Anders Lee play together was something that was pretty rare to find. They were really clicking all year. It was going hot. I guess the surprising part was that they put Zajac with Barzal and Eberle and Palmieri with Peugeot and Wallstrom. That was not what people expected. Every single person was saying Palmieri, going right to that line with Barzal. Not the case. So I'm not sure if they're still kind of toying with lines, but when a week ago they had guys like Leo Komarov on the top line with Barzal, obviously something had to change, because you just can't diminish the upside of your best offensive players by putting guys that are clear defensive forwards just to try to squeak out games 2-1 and let that last through the playoffs. That's just not how you're going to get the job done, even in Barry Trotz's defensive system. So it's a big upgrade. I kind of like Peugeot with Palmieri and Wallstrom. Oliver Wallstrom, many Bruins fans or people in that area might remember him as the kid that did the amazing between the leg goal. And you know what I'm talking about on the junior Bruins. Do you know the story about Oliver Wallstrom? I don't know.
No.
It's a clip you should look up. When he was like 12 on the junior Bruins, he did he put the stick between the legs, like dangled it around, flipped it over his shoulder, and then he was like 11. So yeah, he's a kid from that area, and I'm a big fan of his game as well. Both of them are shooters with Peugeot, who also can be a shooter at times. So it's kind of an interesting third line for them, which is kind of it really makes them, from a team that was so one-dimensional, with like a line one clear and a 1B and Bailey Nelson and oh my God, how do you say his name again? Beauvillier. There it is. I always look at his name and don't want to say it right, but Beauvillier, that was clicking as a second line. So now they have three lines that can actually play. And then you just got to use Zizekas, Martin, and Clutterbuck as your kind of, grinders. I really like that team a lot. Going into this year, anyone who listens to me or has before knows I'm a huge Ryan Pulock fan. Him and Pelech are just one of the best pairs in the NHL and can really shut down anyone on their own. So they're going to be a really tough team to get out in the playoffs. And I'm excited to see what they can do. But like I said, they took two guys in and they put them not where I expected. So always fun to see. And definitely when you're gambling like I do, you got to find out what these players are playing. Palmieri on the top power play as well, which that unit kind of took over as the full, number one unit, and Palmieri scored last game. So it's working.
Yeah. Well, Trotz knows what he's doing. He's won himself a cup. I think he's got the Islanders are awesome. They're a team. I mean, I've watched them play the Bruins a couple times this year. They give them fits every time they take the ice. So, they got a much stronger team. And finally, just to wrap out this division, Jeff Carter from LA to Pittsburgh. Those are the four teams. How do you think that rounds out the Pittsburgh Penguins?
It feels like there was no way Berkey was going to go to the deadline and not do something. And no one knew what it was going to be, but Brian Burke is Brian Burke. And just getting a guy like Jeff Carter sounds exactly like what Brian Burke was going to do. I don't know how we didn't see this coming before. It makes too much sense. So I like the move. I've kind of this year, Jeff Carter's kind of been a guy that will randomly pop on smaller DFS slates as like a decent value, just because he does shoot enough and was playing in that top power play, kind of bouncing back and forth between the two units. So I think there's still some gas in the tank, but not a ton. I don't really think he's going to be much more than your like 12 to 14, 15 minutes a night guy that just can have some offensive upside, but he's not a net negative defensively would be the best way to put it. Nothing that I'm going to lose any sleep over not missing out on, but someone that, and a team like Pittsburgh, who obviously with Malkin being hurt for so much of the year and others, I mean, guys like Jared McCann have become like major assets in DFS and fantasy communities. Evan Rodriguez is getting 15 minutes a night. Guys that are just really your like middling, like depth players that have had to step into roles and produce and are. So you got the Gensel Crosby Russ line that's absolutely crushing. And then you have guys like Lafferty and Skeevier, and this guy came out of nowhere as a horror. Now, like these guys that just are nobodies that started the year in the AHL that are just having to play. So anyone is going to be somewhat of an upgrade over them, and just taking away minutes from them. Not saying that they're the worst. Like some of these guys have produced really well, and I mean, great. Rodriguez has been great. Like he's definitely earned his spot. But I think it's a good enough move. But Pittsburgh's so strapped with cash that it would be tough to get anyone too good.
So looking at these teams right now, obviously it might be tough for the Bruins to move up their seeding because right now they're the fourth best team in the East. Washington at the top, tied with the Islanders at 58, followed by Pittsburgh with 56 points. I mean, taking the points out of the way, how would you rank these four teams after the deadline?
Yeah, honestly, I put the Islanders 1, Boston 2, Washington 3, Pittsburgh 4. I really don't think the Capitals have as much staying power as people think, just because the goaltending has been so unbelievably shaky at times. I mean, who's their starter? I don't know. I guess Vanacek most of the time, not always. And then Samsonov is been, I'd say, pretty bad. I wouldn't even want to say he's been like somewhat good at times. He's been super hit or miss. So you got a guy in Vanacek who coming into this year was not even supposed to be the backup. I mean, Lundqvist was supposed to be the backup. Yeah. I like his game enough, but there's enough holes in it for me to think that that's not going to fly. I'm kind of a believer that in the playoffs, goaltending becomes the most important thing. In the regular season, it's very important. You got a guy like Cal Peterson who could be winning a Vezina this year if it wasn't for playing for the Kings. But if you don't have it in the playoffs and it slips at all, it's going right out the window. You're out in 4 games. So I think that they're probably just ahead of the Penguins because of depth, because I think the Penguins' offense is pretty much that bad, and their defense has been also just very average. So with that being said, I put Boston just ahead of them. And then the Islanders, I do think now take the supreme, kind of take over. I think they have the best tandem in the East by a good margin. That was kind of the question in the East, is like, what are the goaltenders going to shake out like? So many teams with guys like, the bottom is very clear. The Rangers were very young. Who was going to be the starter there? So I really think at the end of the day, it comes down to the goaltending. I mean, look at the Flyers. Holy crap. We don't even say anything about the Flyers yet. If they don't have the worst goaltending in hockey, the Sabres do. But boy, Carter Hart has been a train wreck, and that's why they're not in the playoffs. Yeah. I think he has been the worst goalie that's starting in the league right now. So, it's that important to a team. I think the Flyers are a playoff team with a goaltender that's kept them out, and that the Bruins come back, and Halak's been hit or miss. This later guy actually been pretty solid. So we'll see what they can do. I think the Bruins still have a question mark there. If Tuukka Rask come back, which I think he definitely will in a few weeks here, they could be just right back in it again, and they might be able to move up a spot. So I like them a good bit more, and the experience, and adding Taylor Hall. I mean, you don't get a Taylor Hall at the deadline normally for as cheap as they did. But it's a weird year.
Yeah, it's definitely. I'm surprised if you were to tell me at the beginning of the season that the Sabres would be this horrible and then trade Taylor Hall to the Bruins and not even get a first-round pick in return, I'd tell you you're nuts. Well, here we are, DJ. I'm talking to you on deadline day, and that's exactly what the Bruins and the Sabres did. You talked about goaltending. One goaltender was moved, David Rittich, along with Nick Foligno. They're on their way to Toronto. The number one team there in Canada got a lot stronger here at the deadline.
Yeah, well, Jack Campbell refuses to lose. I mean, again, longtime hockey fans will remember Jack Campbell as, the next great goaltender prospect, 9th overall by the Stars back in like 2011 or 2012. Everyone thought this kid was going to come into the league and be the next great American goalie to take over, and just never got there. And there was little flashes with the Stars, goes to LA, a couple flashes again, finds a home in Toronto. A story this year that is, Lady Bing worthy, in my opinion. He sets the record for consecutive wins. You have to give it up to him, but Freddie Anderson is done. He's done. I don't think he's got much left in the tank. I mean, he has been that bad. Hutchinson was already terrible. So they need to get someone to back him up, because you can't expect this save percentage and PDO to continue. So they go out and get Rittich, who has always been very solid as a backup. When they tried to make him the starter in Calgary, it just didn't quite click. They go out this year and they pick up Markstrom. It didn't really work either. I feel bad for the Flames. I think they have a really good team as well. They just have a lot of money now. And it's been very frustrating. I can't imagine being in that market. So I think it's a good move for him. He's dealt with the pressure already of playing in big games with the Flames. I think, if Campbell starts to slip a little bit, obviously he's won the crease, but if it does happen, you got Rittich there who can get it done. I have a lot of time for him as a backup for sure. So, and then Nick Foligno, the other deal. I mean, I love the deal for Toronto in the sense that it's going to help him this year. I almost can guarantee he goes back to Columbus in the offseason. If you could put money on that, I would, because even beat reporters were like, yeah, he'll be back next year. And I'm like, you guys don't just say this stuff. Like, what do you know? But so I think he'll be back in Columbus. So for Columbus in a bad year, I think Tortorella is definitely going to be fired at the conclusion of this year. They're going to kind of reset a little bit. They're going to get their captain back. But for Toronto to give up a first, I mean, they basically have no draft picks left in this class, but it might be the best class to not have draft picks. And I think that's kind of Dubas's plan here, is to just say, you know what? We don't know much about these later picks. Let's move our picks out and go for it. Toronto hasn't won a cup in like 60, 50 years now.
It's been a while.
Canadian team hasn't won a cup since 93. So someone's got to do it eventually. This is the best chance for a Canadian team to do it, and I think they want to be the one. So good on them. Other than that, I mean, I think that the Canadian division was your kind of clear buyers and sellers. You want to get into any other Canadian teams? You want to talk about?
Well, let's say, it doesn't seem like any really made as nearly as strong as a push than Toronto. Like, obviously the gap right now is 6 games. I mean, 6 points between the Jets and them. But I mean, I got to give this team a lot of credit. This is the first year. Think about it. They don't have to go through Boston. They don't have to go through the Lightning. They don't have to go through some of these top level teams. I'm like, Bruins have to go through, Washington, New York, Pittsburgh. Toronto has to go through Winnipeg, Edmonton, Montreal. Not saying they're bad. I think a Toronto-Montreal series would be nuts. Those two teams hate each other, but Toronto's a way better team.
Yeah. Toronto is, I think, the clear number one. And before the year started, I was like, there's no way they don't win this division. Like, this is theirs for the taking. Like, their goaltending would have to be as bad as it was without Jack Campbell for them to have a chance at missing. So it's been great for them. I mean, I'm a huge Austin Matthews guy. I think he's one of the best players in the world for sure. But on the other end, if Connor McDavid gets in with Leon Draisaitl, there isn't a goalie that can keep those guys off the scoreboard when they're clicking together. So I do think the road's a bit tougher than people give it credit for. I also love the Jets. They're a kind of a team that rides the goaltending a bit too much for me to give them like great odds to win the cup by any stretch. Their defense is pretty porous. They go out and pick up Jordy Ben, which is like a very small improvement, maybe on some guy that they had been putting out there for 12 minutes, but it's nothing to really bat an eye at. They're kind of the one team at the deadline that I'm questioning the most because you got Connor Hellebuck in net. I do believe he's a top 5 goalie in the league for sure. And you just don't give him more support. That is shocking, especially with Blake Wheeler going down. I think he might be out for a little bit of time. I don't know if we have any like strong evidence on how long that'll be. And you just kind of lay an egg at the deadline. Winnipeg though, and it's Cheveldayoff. He doesn't make trades. They did the deal for Evander Kane, and everyone was like, "Oh my god!" Like this is the first deal he ever. They build through the system, and they have gotten to this point. So I don't know. Maybe there's something to it. It's also kind of tough to take a guy like, do you think Taylor Hall was going to waive his no trade clause to go to Winnipeg? Can't really imagine. So,
No.
So no is the right answer. So yeah, I think they're kind of at a tough road to get a guy that was going to be great, but they're a good step below Toronto, and Montreal made some moves to get a little bit better. They got Eric Stahl, and that's probably gonna get you maybe like 0.5 more wins. Nothing crazy. They're a deep enough team to where you could see a scenario where they could slip by a team in the playoffs, but they would need Carey Price to be the best goalie in the world to beat Toronto. So yeah, it's Toronto's for the taking, and then you're going to get down to really, I think that they'll probably end up having to play a team like, Boston or the division in the playoffs is so different this year. It's not even worth getting into how it's going to shape out, but we really, at the end of the day, Toronto, if Toronto folds in the playoffs in the first round this year, I think the city burns. I think that's just it. They got to just start over from the ashes because, oh man, would that be like last year when it was Columbus? It was such a weird year that people like rationalized it, but it can't happen again.
Yeah. Well, one more team I want to get to before we end the show here is the Florida Panthers. They traded with your Buffalo Sabres, acquiring Brandon Montour, and then added some depth, physical depth here with Sam Bennett on deadline day. You think this Florida team can make some noise here in the postseason, or what? What are your thoughts on the Panthers?
To begin the year, the Panthers were one of the biggest question marks for me. It's probably the weakest division outside of maybe the West, you could argue. And they come into the year and probably the most change of any team. Carter Verhaeghe, I'm a huge fan of. I was very high on him early in the year. I was smashing his to score prop. It was like 420. He's playing with Sasha Barkov. I'm like, people are not betting this every night. I don't know what's going on. It finally, at one point when Barkov was out, it was the worst odds to score in a couple of games. So was really happy to get it on that early. But the Florida Panthers, they got a great coach in Quenneville. I really like the GM pickup of Zito. I was one of the guys that I was kind of a big fan of, just the way he's made moves. It kind of seems like he was a big catalyst for a lot of the Columbus Blue Jackets moves of the past. So I was a big fan of that signing. Do I think they have enough to get through? I mean, the question you have to ask yourself is Sasha Barkov an MVP candidate? Is a guy like Jason Marchment as good as he's been? Again, I don't know for sure. They're one of the few teams that really roll the top lines, which I think is going to be, a big in the playoffs. Every team will start doing that. So if they can get the same production out of Hornqvist that they've gotten out of Verhaeghe, two guys that kind of come into this team, and there were question marks. I mean, Hornqvist was getting older. He really only produced strongly on the power play in Pittsburgh. He never really had great 5-on-5 metrics. All of a sudden he plays with Huberdeau and it's working, but is that going to last in the playoffs? They need to do something on the point. You lose Aaron Ekblad, who has finally taken that true number 1 overall pick form, and he goes down. Brandon Montour is simply not Aaron Ekblad, but Brandon Montour does have a ton of offensive upside. He has really, really shown it in the past month with the Sabres. I mean, just watching him skate with the puck, if you haven't done it before, turn on the Florida Panthers and watch it, because when he gets going, he can go as fast as anyone with the puck. I mean, obviously not McDavid or anything, but he can fly down the ice with it and set up a guy for a goal. He shoots a ton, and that's what they really are missing now. You can't just roll Gudas and Strawman and Uyghur and Frostling and think you're going to get much. Yandel has been really demoted to a power play specialist. And then some guy that comes out of the college rankings in Kriested, who was on the first unit, kind of bounces back and forth. But again, this is the guy that was playing in the NCAA against NCAA players about 2 weeks ago. It just wasn't going to get the job done long term. So they had to do something. I think it was a good move for them for sure. I think it's equally a good move for the Sabres, who at least get a third back on Montour. You weren't going to get much. He was definitely gone after the year ended. There was probably no way he was going to come back to that same unit again in Buffalo. Most players probably won't. It's a fair move, but the Florida Panthers are a team that I have a lot of question marks around. Their goaltending, huge question mark. Bobrovsky's been a lot better this year, but Drieger has actually kind of carried the net more than anything else. Neither of these guys I have a ton of faith in the playoffs, so I kind of like them if I was going to match up against anyone a little bit more than maybe most, especially because it's probably going to be Carolina. Like I'd probably take them for sure. Tampa's probably going to draw Nashville. Yeah, it's probably going to get the Tampa Carolina, which will be probably the Stanley Cup good type of game on the East, at least. I mean, the West is a whole other story. It'd be really interesting to see for sure. I'm excited. That is probably what I'm most excited for is the Carolina Tampa matchup that I think most of us expect.
All right, DJ, before I let you go, man, how can our listeners keep in touch with you on social media, listen to your podcast, send them where they can go to?
All right, so I'll start by myself, DJ, at DJ_Mitchell94. That's where you find me on Twitter. I post a lot of dumb, funny hockey things. I try to keep it light on there. I'm much more of a joke giver than a serious type of person. I don't like to, you're not going to find a lot of scolding hot takes or anything. As far as the Mayo Media Network, that's Pat Mayo, who some of you probably will know. He is probably the best golf analyst. He does an unbelievable amount of fantasy golf stuff. With the Masters, it seemed like every day in my podcast, he was getting more and more. And he had a lot of people like myself on some golfers that did pretty well. So if you like fantasy golf, definitely check out Pat Mayo and the Mayo Media Network, which now covers baseball, esports, hockey. Hockey was the first one that kind of tested the market, and it kind of worked, I guess. So the Fantasy Hockey Picks and Bet Show, which SEO value through the roof. So if you look up fantasy hockey, you'll probably find it on your podcast feed. Fantasy Hockey Picks and Bets is what it's called. And then if you like daily fantasy hockey, Morning Skate podcast, I do with Matt Moody. Matt Moody, one of my best friends from home, he just took down the 333 Spinorama on Saturday for a huge win. I mean, we've been doing it for years. So Morning Skate podcast, Mayo Media Network, Fantasy Hockey Picks and Bets, and they have every sport. So if you like gambling, the baseball one that just started is really good for people that want like 15, 20 minutes of like daily fantasy and then just moving on, because there's baseball you could break down for hours.
Yeah.
So check all that out. If you like gambling, that's where you want to go. Definitely at this point, it's growing, but it's not anything where you're going to get a ton of ownership push from any of these podcasts. So for people that like to gamble, you might know what I mean, but everyone else is probably like, what is he talking about? But yeah, anything else, Walt, I'm missing? I mean, we didn't even talk about Lazar or anything, but he might bounce into.
No, I mean, yeah,
I kind of forgot about that.
Yeah, I mean, a depth piece. I don't know much there, but I think we should be good.
He just, I guess briefly, is the guy that was like, Ottawa got this like super scorer prospect that just never clicked, and then came to Buffalo and had more goals than Eichel and Hall. So
now he's on the Bruins.
Yeah, I think he'll be a nice addition to the third and fourth line who cannot score right now. Like that was the Bruins. Like, we got to get someone down here that might have a chance to put a puck in the net. That was the only other guy that I think we forgot to cover. But thank you again for having me, and I don't want to go too over on time. So
cool. Well, that's going to be it for this episode of the Alec Walt Show. I'm your host, Alec Walt, alongside DJ Mitchell. Definitely make sure to follow him on all forms of social media. This guy is the man to go to for all things fantasy hockey. If you want to keep up with all things I do here on Down the Block Sports, feel free to like this video and subscribe to Down the Block for more exclusive content. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in, and go Bruins.